the smiling man. It all started during one of those sleepless nights. You know, the kind when the world feels too quiet and your thoughts are too loud. I had developed a habit of going on late-night walks to clear my head, and up until that point, it had always been calming. The city streets were usually empty, the air crisp, and I enjoyed the solitude. On this particular night, it was around 2 a.m. when I set out. The streets were deserted, as expected, but there was something different in the air, a kind of stillness that felt unnatural, the kind that makes your skin prickle, like the city itself was holding its breath. I chose a route I hadn't walked before. It wasn't a bad part of town, just quieter, with fewer streetlights and more shadows than I was used to. I told myself it was fine. What could possibly happen in the middle of the city? About 10 minutes into my walk, I noticed something up ahead, a figure standing under one of the few streetlights. At first, I didn't pay much attention. People were unpredictable in cities. Maybe he was waiting for someone or just taking a break from wherever he was headed. But as I got closer, I realized something was off. The man wasn't standing still. He was moving, but not walking. He was dancing. Not the kind of dancing you'd see in a club or even on a stage, but something strange. His movements were exaggerated and theatrical, like he was in his own private performance. He twirled, his arms sweeping dramatically as though he was holding an invisible partner. What unnerved me most, though, was his face. His head was tilted back unnaturally, and his mouth was stretched into a wide grin. Not the kind of grin that comes from joy or humor, but something forced, frozen, almost predatory. I slowed my pace, unsure of what to do. Crossing the street seemed like the safest option, so I did. I kept my head down, trying not to draw attention to myself. But as I passed, I could feel his eyes on me. It was like he knew I was watching him, even though I wasn't. Then, just as I thought I'd passed without incident, he stopped dancing. The sound of his movements, his shuffling feet, the faint swish of his clothing, abruptly ceased. I froze for a second before I dared to glance back. He was standing perfectly still now, facing me. His grin hadn't faltered, and his body was unnervingly still, like a statue. My heart started pounding. There was no way I was sticking around to find out what he wanted. I turned back and walked faster, my footsteps echoing louder than they should have on the empty street. And then I heard it, the sound of footsteps behind me. But they weren't normal footsteps. They were quick, deliberate, and almost rhythmic, like dancing. I glanced over my shoulder, and my blood turned to ice. He was following me, but he wasn't walking. He was still dancing, his arms and legs moving in those same exaggerated theatrical motions. Yet somehow he was gaining on me. Panic surged through me. I started walking faster, then running. The sound of his footsteps grew louder, keeping pace with me. I didn't dare look back again. My breath was ragged by the time I rounded a corner, praying I'd lose him. The street was darker here, only one dim streetlight illuminating the path ahead. I slowed down, trying to quiet my steps and listen. Nothing. For a moment, I thought I'd lost him. Maybe he wasn't chasing me after all. Maybe he was just some crazy guy who happened to be going the same way. I leaned against a wall to catch my breath, my heart hammering in my chest. That's when I saw him. He was standing under the streetlight ahead, as if he'd been waiting for me. His grin seemed wider now, impossibly so, stretching across his pale face. And his eyes, they were fixed on me, unblinking, as though he could see straight through me. I don't know how long we stood there, staring at each other. Felt like hours, though it was probably only seconds. My mind was screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Then, slowly, he started dancing again. His movements were slow at first, deliberate, but as he stepped closer, they became faster, more frantic. His feet barely touched the ground, yet he moved with inhuman speed. That's when I snapped out of it. I turned and ran as fast as I could, not caring where I was going. All I wanted was to get away. The streets blurred around me as I sprinted, my lungs burning, my legs aching. I could still hear him behind me, his dancing footsteps echoing in the darkness. No matter how fast I ran, He seemed to keep up, always just out of sight but close enough to hear. Finally, I spotted the glow of a 24-hour diner up ahead. The sight of other people was like a lifeline. I stumbled inside, gasping for air, and collapsed into a booth. The waitress came over, concerned, but I couldn't explain what had happened. What could I say? That I was being chased by a dancing man with a horrifying grin? She'd think I was crazy. I stayed in that diner until the sun came up. When I finally stepped outside, the streets felt normal again, alive with the sound of traffic and people starting their day. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, somewhere. I haven't taken a late-night walk since.
I live in a small village close to a forest named Visitor's Woods. From late childhood, I often heard a chilling story about why it got that name. They say you don't want to stay in those woods for too long. It's not safe. People vanish, leaving no trace. The villagers whisper about strange sightings, eerie voices, and the overwhelming feeling of being watched. Despite these tales, life continued as usual, and I never thought much of it. One day, my younger brother woke up with a peculiar idea. He wanted to take a walk in the infamous forest. He didn't believe in any of those silly tales, as he called them. He mocked my hesitation, teasing me for being scared. I didn't want to appear cowardly in his eyes, so I agreed. To add to the thrill, he suggested we do it at night, sneaking out while our parents slept. It felt risky, but I couldn't back out now. At midnight, we grabbed a flashlight and some snacks, then slipped out of the house. The forest was eerily quiet, with only the crunch of leaves beneath our feet. At first, everything seemed fine, even exciting. But as time passed, we realized we were hopelessly lost. We tried retracing our steps, but quickly gave up. Exhausted and disoriented, we decided to sleep and find our way out in the morning. 3 hours later, I woke up to strange, unsettling noises. My heart pounded as I scanned the darkness, calling for my brother. But he was gone. Thinking he might be looking for a midnight snack, I called louder. To my horror, a voice answered, but it wasn't his. The voice, though eerily similar, was wrong, distorted. Suddenly, the voice began urging me, Go here, don't stop, I beg you, don't stop." Despite my fear, I obeyed. I ran toward the voice, deeper into the woods. That's when I stumbled upon my brother's lifeless body. There were no wounds, no signs of a struggle, just a strange, sickly smell surrounding him. Panic surged through me, and I turned to flee, but something grabbed my boot. I fell hard, the flashlight slipping from my hand. As I struggled, the trees around me seemed to come alive. Their twisted branches swayed unnaturally, almost as if they were dancing. The world spun, and I felt myself losing consciousness. When I woke up, it was morning, and I was lying at the edge of the forest. My brother was gone. No one believed my story, saying I must have been dreaming. But I know what I saw, what I heard. Visitors' Woods took my brother, and it almost took me. To this day, I can still hear the distorted voice in my nightmares, urging me to run.